It's probably no surprise now that Trouble's bodywork was in much worse condition than I'd originally thought. It definitely was not a matter of welding in a new floor pan here and a sill there. The rust was extensive. For her body to be rebuilt exactly as it left the factory, it would require some pretty specialist knowledge of Porsche 356 construction. This isn't the type of knowledge you can gain from reading a few books and looking at pictures. It is the type of knowledge you get from working on these cars day in, day out, cutting them up and seeing how the individual parts are arranged and joined together. Half of Trouble's panels were missing. There was no hope in getting an idea of panel arrangement from Trouble herself, and sadly, I didn't know anyone who had a 356 that would let me cut theirs up so I could work out how Trouble was supposed to go back together. It sounds like I'm making excuses, but I'm not. I couldn't weld, I didn't have the knowledge or the skill set needed to make half of Trouble's panels. So I went and found an expert. Dave is a man who can weld, MIG, TIG, gas, spot, you name it. He knows the construction of these cars inside and out and has the skill set to make any panels I can't buy. Once Trouble was grip blast, she was ready to go down to Dave's. Remember what I was saying the day we picked Trouble up from the grip blaster? That it was a dry day? Well, the weather for the rest of the week wasn't looking too good, so we decided it was best to take Trouble straight down to Dave on the same day while we had a weather window. The last thing I wanted to do was transport Trouble, who is now in bare metal, on the back of an open trailer in the rain. Her phosphate protected coating would be washed off in seconds, and then she would start rusting all over again. We wasted no time, but didn't have enough time. Water droplets started hitting the windscreen and the weather forecast no longer looked so good. Luckily, we had a tarpaulin in the car, so pulled over and wrapped Trouble up in it. The tarp was no match against Trouble's rusty, jagged edges though. Safe to say, it was a disaster, and the last thing I was really thinking about was Phil. We eventually made it to Dave's unit and unloaded Trouble. A few days later, I went back down to Dave's, not with towels to dry her off, but to cut her nose off.
Good morning guys, so we're on the road today. We're heading off down to Trouble to go do some work on her. I'm off to drill out some of the spot welds around her front clip so that we can take that off. Should be a fun day. I'm excited. First kind of not real progress on the body. I guess it's the strip down of the body so that we can start building it back up. But yeah, that's what we're up to today. Drilling out some spot welds. I've never done this before, so it's going to be a first for me. I'm quite excited. I'm sure there'll be some learning curves. It's going to be good. Let's see how it goes.
The Porsche 356 is constructed with a structural inner monocoque and an outer skin, so that Dave could access the inner monocoque and begin rebuilding the rusty structure. First, Trouble's nose panel, often referred to as a clip amongst Porsche owners, and front wings needed to be cut off. There are two approaches to do this. The easy way to do it is to just use an angle grinder and cut just next to the spot welded seam, something like what's being done in this photo. The proper way is to drill out all the spot welds, separating the exterior panels from the internal monocoque. This second approach is much more time consuming, but easy if you can use a drill. So to save me and my sister some money, I did it for Dave. A spot weld is a type of weld used to join two sheets of thin sheet metal that are lapped over each other. To undo a spot weld and separate two pieces of metal that have been fused together, you drill through the weld on one of the layers of metal, which will in theory separate the two. I had never drilled out spot welds, so the first few were a learning curve. In fact, the whole process was a learning curve. The first job, and arguably the hardest job, is finding the spot welds. Luckily, the clamping of the spot weld tool makes a slight depression, leaving a small round dimple where the weld is. To help highlight the location of the spot welds, I used some sandpaper, the idea being that the low dimpled spot welds wouldn't get scratched, but the rest of the metal would. Once I'd found my first spot weld, it was time to get the drill out and drill through the top layer of metal. removing the weld holding the two together. Now this is much easier said than done. Firstly, welds are typically much harder than the surrounding steel. This can cause the drill bit to wander. And secondly, knowing when you've drilled through the first layer and stopping is an art. It's all too easy to drill through both layers, as I soon found out. I started at the top of the front wing on the left-hand side of Trouble and worked my way down to the nose. Down this side, there was about a spot weld every inch or so. The flange holding the front wings and nose clip on was approximately 110 inches long, so I calculated that I only had 111 spot welds to drill out, or so I thought. As I got to the front of the bonnet shut, the spot welds started getting hard to spot. My sandpaper trick no longer worked. The reason for this was because this part of the car had been loaded with lead, a factory procedure to get the perfect shape and shut lines. Before I could continue, I had to melt and wipe it out. With the lead removed, the spot welds reappeared and I could continue drilling them out. Back on track, except the frequency of spot welds stepped up a notch. On this side, instead of there being a spot weld every inch or so, there was now a weld every 1 centimetre, if not less. Some even overlapped. It was as if two completely different people did either side, or at some point, the right-hand wing had been taken off and they wanted to make sure it wasn't going to fall off. It was an absolute nightmare. I eventually made my way through the remaining spot welds. There were hundreds of them. The last thing, to make sure all the spot welds had been removed, was to pry the panels apart with a chisel. Once free, I then uncovered the factory seams joining the rear of the wing to the body of the car, which were also flooded with lead. Once I could see the factory weld seams, I got Dave to send the angle grinder through them, separating the wings from the rest of Trouble's body. The last thing to detach was the bonnet latch plate, and then we lifted the nose and wings off. This is what was hiding underneath. Trouble's nose panel, which should be, and I thought was one piece, was actually three. At some point in time, Trouble has clearly had a front end crash, and to gain access to put it right, they cut the middle section out of her nose and then brazed it back in. It was in such bad shape that it wasn't worth repairing. The positive is that I now have some nice, albeit expensive, wall art. Worse is what was hiding behind Trouble's front wings and nose panel. I knew the bottom of the battery box was in dire straits, but it turns out the rest of it was also. When Dave was like, the first thing that he's going to be doing before he starts on any of Trouble's bodywork was taking off Trouble's front clip and the wings. I was like, ooh, hang on. How do you do that? Maybe that's something I can do to save Ellie and me some money. And he was like, yeah, well, basically you just drill through those spot welds and then just cut the wings off at the factory seams. I was like, banging, I can do that. So yeah, went down to do it. Not so easy actually. It was, I mean, how many were there? There were hundreds of spot welds. There were probably more spot welds on Trouble's nose clip than there are on a battleship. Yeah, well, maybe not. I actually don't know how many spot welds are on a battleship, if any. But there was a lot of spot welds. The biggest problem is that maybe I wasn't using a big enough spot weld drill, but I found the spot welds are hard to find. But once you have found them, it's actually really difficult to drill right down the middle of a spot weld. And as a result, what you end up doing is leaving like the smallest tag of the spot weld joining the two layers together. So that's why you then have to get a chisel in to try and then rip the rest of the spot weld apart. And it's just, yeah, not that easy. Would I do it again? Yeah, I would. I would do it again, but in fact, I did do it again. Trouble's rear end was in pretty much the same condition as her front end, which you'll soon find out. That's for another video. But yeah, I would do it again. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a like. If you have any questions about what you've seen, or if you've got any tips for me about maybe how to drill out spot welds a little bit more easily, please get those in the comments. And if you don't want to miss a moment of Trouble's restoration, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.